I never understood why I was the one hospitalized after my sister's accident until those x-rays revealed what everyone tried to hide. Pain exploded through my lower half the second my eyes flickered open. The familiar crown molding of the downstairs guest bedroom loomed above me, casting long, suffocating shadows across the ceiling. My throat felt like cracked earth. I reached blindly toward the nightstand to call for help, but my fingers scraped across bare wood. My phone was gone. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, and my mother floated into the room, carrying a silver tray lined with 3 thick white pills. Her smile was tight, practically sewn onto her face. She set the tray down, smoothed her designer skirt, and whispered that the police had already taken her statement. She made sure they wrote it down exactly as she told them. I had tripped on the stone patio stairs. Just another clumsy accident. The throbbing in my shattered ribs spiked, making it impossible to draw a full breath. I stared at the heavy brass lock on the bedroom door, and the reality of my situation slammed into my chest. I was not recovering in my family home. I was a hostage. They thought breaking my bones would break my spirit. They were wrong. The memory of what actually happened burned behind my eyes, sharper than the physical agony radiating from my pelvis. 2 days earlier, I had walked into our late grandmother's study and caught my sister, Courtney, shoving heirloom diamond necklaces into a velvet travel pouch. Courtney was the golden child. She was a high-powered corporate consultant, the pride of our affluent Charlotte neighborhood, and the jewel of my parents' country club circle. But her luxurious lifestyle was a meticulously constructed lie. I had confronted her right there on the patio, demanding to know why she was pawning our family history. She sneered, admitting her credit cards were maxed out and she was quietly draining my $250,000 trust fund to pay for her upcoming society wedding. When I pulled out my phone to call our father, the golden child snapped. Her hand slammed into my shoulders. The world tilted. The stone stairs rushed up to meet me, and darkness swallowed the impact. My parents knew exactly what Courtney did. They did not care. As I lay immobilized in that guest bed, the truth settled over me like a suffocating blanket. My parents did not actually love Courtney more than me. They loved what Courtney represented. She was their trophy, their proof of superior parenting, their golden ticket to the absolute top tier of Charlotte society. I was just a high school art teacher, a liability. Exposing Courtney's violent, debt-ridden reality would humiliate my parents in front of their wealthy peers. And they would rather see me permanently disabled than face a public scandal. My father, a prominent surgeon with terrifying local influence, had already used his connections to orchestrate the cover-up. He stood at the foot of my bed the next morning, adjusting his expensive tie, and delivered the ultimatum. He was the legal executor of my grandmother's estate. If I breathed a word of the truth, if I ruined his perfect daughter's wedding, he would use his fiduciary power to freeze my $250,000 trust fund indefinitely on the grounds of my mental instability. He told me to swallow the pills, stay quiet, and smile for the rehearsal dinner photos. I stopped fighting. I let my eyes glaze over. I nodded weakly, letting them believe their psychological warfare had worked. The moment my father left the room, I spat the heavy sedatives into a tissue and shoved them deep inside my pillowcase. My best friend, Natalie, owned a bakery downtown and practically bulldozed her way into the house later that afternoon under the guise of delivering get-well pastries. My mother tried to block her, but Natalie smiled fiercely and pushed past the threshold. When she leaned over to hug me, she slipped a cold flat iPad and my old Apple Watch beneath my blankets. Accessing the truth required strategy, not magic. My parents had confiscated my phone, assuming they had cut off my only connection to the outside world. But my father, in his obsessive need for control, had forced our entire family onto a shared cloud storage plan years ago so he could monitor our data usage. I strapped the Apple Watch to my wrist, connecting it to the house internet. When I attempted to log into the family cloud on the smuggled iPad, the two-factor authentication prompt bypassed my confiscated phone and pinged directly to my watch. I tapped approve. One glance at the screen confirmed everything. Courtney was incredibly arrogant, but she was also lazy. She had taken photos of her pawn shop tickets and her final credit card default notices so she would not lose them, completely forgetting that her phone's camera roll automatically synced to the shared family drive. I downloaded every single receipt, every default notice, and every pawn ticket. Financial proof was only half the battle. I needed medical validation, and I knew my father's corrupt colleagues would never give it to me. My opportunity arrived 3 days later during my one permitted hospital follow-up. My mother hovered over my wheelchair in the examination room, her manicured hand gripping my shoulder like a vice, refusing to leave my side. She answered the nurse's questions for me, spinning the tragic tale of my clumsy fall. I waited until the attending physician entered the room. It was Dr. Erica Foster, an emergency room veteran known for her absolute refusal to tolerate wealthy entitlement. I forced my breathing to accelerate. I dug my fingernails into my palms until my hands shook violently. I triggered a massive, undeniable panic attack right in the middle of the examination. The monitors screamed. Dr. Foster's eyes narrowed, shifting from my hyperventilating chest to my mother's suffocating grip on my shoulder. She immediately invoked a strict, non-negotiable hospital protocol for trauma patients. It was a mandatory 5-minute private evaluation, completely free of family members, to screen for domestic abuse. My mother's face flushed with anger, but she was legally forced to step out into the hallway. The heavy door closed. I stopped hyperventilating instantly. I looked Dr. Foster dead in the eye, pulled the iPad from behind my back brace, and slid it across the examination table. I gave her the exact timeline of the attack and begged for a forensic, objective X-ray of my shattered pelvis. She reviewed the files, her expression hardening into absolute stone. She bypassed the standard imaging department, took the X-rays herself, and printed the results. She pointed to a specific jagged fracture pattern on the film. It was a defensive break, the undeniable result of directed violent force, completely inconsistent with a simple slip and fall. She handed me the official medical report, stamped and signed with her credentials. The trap was fully set. The night of Courtney's lavish engagement party arrived. The Charlotte Country Club was dripping in white orchids and crystal chandeliers. My mother dressed me in a long, elegant gown that perfectly concealed my back brace. She wheeled me into the grand ballroom, her fingers digging a silent warning into my shoulder. I smiled. I played the clumsy, supportive sister flawlessly, nodding at the wealthy guests who offered their fake, pitying sympathies. Courtney glided through the room, sipping vintage champagne, completely convinced she had won. But I had no intention of causing a screaming match. I did not need a dramatic microphone grab. And I certainly did not need to hack the ballroom projector. Narcissists survive by twisting memories and manipulating emotions. But you cannot gaslight an X-ray. And you cannot argue with a pawn shop receipt. Before the party even began, I had Natalie hand deliver a thick, sealed envelope to Courtney's future mother-in-law. The groom's family was old money, ruthlessly protective of their reputation, and famously intolerant of scandal. The ballroom hummed with laughter and the clinking of crystal. Courtney's fiancé stepped up to the microphone, raising his glass to propose a toast to his beautiful bride. But before he could speak a single word, his mother stepped onto the grand staircase. The temperature in the room plummeted. She did not yell. She did not cause a scene. She simply walked straight up to my parents, her face a mask of absolute disgust. She handed my father the printed medical report outlining the assault. And she dropped the stack of pawn shop receipts directly onto Courtney's chest. The papers fluttered to the marble floor like dead leaves. The silence that followed was deafening. The groom's mother looked at Courtney and spoke in a voice loud enough for the entire front row of Charlotte's elite to hear. She announced that the wedding was permanently canceled, that their family would not marry into a lineage of violent, bankrupt fraudsters, and that their lawyers would be demanding the return of the $100,000 engagement ring by morning. Courtney dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor. My father's face turned a horrifying shade of purple as the surrounding guests began whispering furiously, backing away from our family as if we were diseased. The groom did not even look at Courtney. He simply turned around, walked out the front doors of the country club, and got into his car. The public execution was flawless, quiet, and completely irreversible. My parents were ruined. The country club revoked their membership within a week. My father's hospital board placed him on immediate administrative leave, pending an investigation into his medical cover-up. I packed my belongings the very next morning, walked out of that house on my crutches, and moved into Natalie's spare apartment. But a golden child stripped of their unearned pedestal does not simply apologize. They turned feral. Courtney blamed me for the destruction of her perfect life, and she wanted blood. 3 weeks later, Courtney executed her final desperate strike. Before I moved out, she had secretly swiped my spare faculty identification badge and my master classroom keys from my purse. She assumed I was too distracted to notice. At 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, Courtney used the stolen badge to seamlessly bypass the high school's electronic security gates. She crept into my art classroom in the dark, carrying a massive stash of her own illicit schedule, 2 prescription narcotics. Her plan was to plant the drugs in my desk, call in an anonymous tip to the school board, and have me arrested for dealing heavy narcotics on school property. It would instantly destroy my teaching license and land me in prison. Access was not magic. I knew exactly what she had stolen, and I let her take the keys. As Courtney unzipped her bag and shoved the heavy pill bottles into my bottom desk drawer, a small red light blinked from the top shelf of the supply closet. It was a high-definition baby monitor. I was sitting in the school parking lot, watching the live feed on my iPad from the passenger seat of a police cruiser. I handed the tablet to the commanding officer. The tactical team moved in silently. The classroom lights snapped on, blinding Courtney as 4 armed officers swarmed the room. She was caught red-handed, her hands still clutching the illegal pills. Because she had brought the narcotics onto public school property, the charges were instantly elevated. She walked out of my school in handcuffs, crying hysterically, charged with felony drug distribution in a school zone. The legal aftermath was swift and merciless. My father was legally stripped of his fiduciary powers over my trust fund after the court reviewed his attempts at extortion. The judge granted me full, immediate access to the $250,000. The court sentenced Courtney to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 4 years. The judge also ordered full financial restitution for the money she had stolen from my grandmother's estate. 6 months passed, the dust settled, and the chaotic noise of my past finally faded into silence. The first winter snow was falling outside my new apartment window when the letter arrived. It was stamped with the seal of the state correctional facility. It was from Courtney. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I did not feel fear. I simply sliced the envelope open and read her cramped, frantic handwriting. She spent 3 pages detailing how hard her life was, how the food was terrible, and how our parents had stopped answering her calls because they could not afford the social embarrassment of visiting a prison. The final paragraph was a desperate, hollow manipulation attempt. She wrote that we were still blood, that family forgives family, and that she needed me to put money on her commissary account. I read the final line, folded the paper perfectly in half, and dropped it into the shredder. I did not reply. I did not write back to gloat. The silence was my final answer. My new life is filled with genuine peace. I used a portion of the trust fund to help Natalie expand her bakery. And in return, she gave me a family that requires 0 performance. The people in my life today do not care about country club memberships or perfect optics. They care about honesty, respect, and mutual support. The contrast between the suffocating transactional love of my biological parents and the unconditional warmth of my chosen family is the greatest revelation of my life. Looking back at the wreckage of the Brooks family, I realized that surviving a toxic dynamic is not just about escaping the physical house. It is about completely rewiring your understanding of love, loyalty, and justice. When you are raised in a family that prioritizes appearances over reality, you are conditioned to believe that keeping the peace is more important than telling the truth. But keeping the peace in a toxic environment simply means setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I want to share the 3 absolute rules of survival I learned from dismantling my family's empire of lies. Rule number 1 is the reality of the loyalty trap. Blood does not entitle anyone to your peace, your safety, or your future. Toxic loyalty is a hostage situation disguised as a biological obligation. The moment someone demands that you sacrifice your well-being to protect their reputation, they have forfeited their right to call you family. You are allowed to walk away from the people who hurt you, even if you share a last name, even if they share your DNA. Rule number 2 is the evidence imperative. Never, ever fight a gaslighter with emotions. Fight them with receipts. Narcissists will twist your memory, invalidate your pain, and convince the world that you are the unstable one. They thrive in the gray areas of subjective memory. You cannot change their minds, and you cannot force them to feel empathy, but they cannot argue with timestamps, financial records, and medical x-rays. When dealing with manipulators, document everything. Let the hard, objective evidence speak the truth your voice is too exhausted to carry. Rule number 3 is the ultimate vindication. True revenge is not about screaming at your abusers or watching them suffer. True revenge is moving on and living a wildly successful, deeply authentic life. The most devastating blow you can deliver to people who wanted to see you fail is to heal perfectly without them. Every morning I wake up in a peaceful home, surrounded by people who genuinely love me. I am delivering the final nail into the coffin of my parents' control. My unbothered success is my absolute victory. Trust is earned, not owed. Respect is a baseline requirement, not a reward for perfect behavior. I spent 26 years existing in the margins of a family narrative that demanded my silence in exchange for basic shelter. Today, I demand the truth, and I accept nothing less. Have you ever had to stop setting yourself on fire to keep your family warm? If you have ever had to pack your bags and walk away from the very people who were supposed to protect you, drop a broken heart in the comments below. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And your story deserves to be heard. Subscribe and share this video with someone who needs the strength to choose themselves tonight. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. Why didn't she just call the police the second she woke up? Why did she let her parents lock her in that room and drug her? Let me explain the psychology of a golden child family dynamic. Vanessa wasn't weak, and she certainly wasn't stupid. When you are raised in a highly toxic, appearance-obsessed household, you are conditioned by something psychologists call the slot machine effect, or intermittent reinforcement. Her parents gave her just enough crumbs of hope, a rare nod of approval at dinner, a brief fake smile to keep her pulling the lever, hoping for a jackpot of genuine love that was never going to come. When her mother walked in with those pills, Vanessa's brain was fighting 26 years of survival programming that told her to just comply and keep the peace. Breaking that spell is exactly like breaking a chemical addiction. But once that spell was broken, Vanessa executed an absolute masterclass in smart revenge. Let's break down her street-smart financial defense, because this is exactly how you dismantle a real-world manipulator without relying on movie logic. First, the audit strategy: scammers, abusers, and entitled golden children thrive in the dark. They rely on you being too emotional or too intimidated to look at the actual paperwork. Courtney thought she was untouchable, but she was arrogant and lazy. Vanessa bypassing her confiscated phone by using the two-factor authentication ping on her old Apple Watch. That is brilliant. She didn't scream or argue with her sister. She just quietly gathered the receipts from the shared cloud drive. Second, building the case. My absolute favorite part of this story is how Vanessa weaponized a strict hospital protocol to isolate her controlling mother and secure that forensic X-ray. She knew her father had corrupt local influence. She didn't just complain to a random nurse. She triggered a mandatory domestic abuse screening to secure objective, undeniable medical evidence from an unbiased third party. Third, the buyout. Her father tried to hold her $250,000 trust fund hostage to buy her silence. Vanessa played along just long enough to let the groom's family do the dirty work at the engagement party. By using the evidence to legally strip her father of his fiduciary powers, she essentially bought out her own freedom. She invested in her independence instead of negotiating with emotional terrorists. Here is the verdict. Toxic people will always underestimate your intelligence because they are blinded by their own ego. But intelligence without evidence is just a rumor. Vanessa won because she stopped seeking an apology and started building a prosecution. Your peace of mind is your absolute most valuable asset. If it costs you a relationship with people who lie to you, you are getting a bargain. Has anyone ever tried to trap you in a web of family guilt or financial manipulation? How did you break out? Drop your survival strategies in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more Real Talk breakdowns. And remember, always keep the receipts.